We're joined today by bassist Tony Levin. He's played with everybody from Peter Gabriel to Alice Cooper, John Lennon, Pink Floyd, and right now he's playing with a group called Beat. They'll be at State Theater here in Minneapolis coming up November 4th. Tony, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay. My pleasure.
Well, Tony, you're coming to the State Theater here in Minneapolis on November 4th with Beat. First of all, can you tell the listeners a bit about Beat, how that all came about?
Sure. It's a funny name for a tour that doesn't imply much of anything, but we are playing the music of King Crimson in the 80s. King Crimson, I was in it at the time, and I vividly remember we did 3 albums, whole lot of tours. Adrian Belew, our lead singer and one of the guitarists in King Crimson, put this idea together of how about if he and I revisit this music now and tour with it, and it was very special music, even though it was way back in the 80s. And instead of reforming the band, how about bringing in a couple of really super players? So we have Steve Vai, a world famous guitar player who's fantastic, and frankly one of the only guitar players who could even think about trying to copy or somewhat copy Robert Fripp's very difficult parts from the 80s. And Danny Carey, our drummer, is the drummer in Tool, also very world famous drummer. And so we're really having fun. We didn't know when we made the plan, we knew it would be good music, but we're really having fun and enjoying the experience of seeing where this music can go, because we're not doing it exactly like it was.
It is great that you guys are really hitting the road hard with the tour, and I've seen the demand was so great you've even ended up adding some shows here.
Yes, when you say hit the road hard, you took the words out of my mouth. You phrased it very well, because I'm used to touring. I tour all the time, but not usually at this pace. We have 64 shows, I think, between September and December. Wow. So we're really hitting it, a bus tour around 2 laps around the U.S. and Canada, and it's fun. And I'm at my, shall I call it age or my level of experience? I'm always concerned about, can I hold up to this physically? And it's turning out it's fine and really enjoyable. But as on all tours I do, it's those 2 hours or 2.5 hours on stage that get you through the other 22 hours. So whether you're flying or on a bus or in vans, that's never the fun part of the tour. It's the time that you're on stage.
Sure. Well, how is it for you recreating these King Crimson songs on stage every night? I mean, it's one thing to make it all happen in the studio, but I mean, this is some complex music. On stage, that's a whole different deal. Yes,
very good question. For the 2 quote unquote new guys in the band, they had to do a tremendous amount of homework. For me, not so much, because I played the original parts back in the 80s, and we toured with most of this music. Most of it we played before live. So I had played it a lot. I had to revisit it, of course, and learn it. And darn, the younger me did play some technically pretty tricky stuff, some counter rhythms and very, very King Crimson style stuff. So it was a challenge to practice and learn that, and I did. But really, the challenge and the experience of playing it live for me is not reproducing what we did then. It's where it can go. And it was the same when we toured in the 80s. I did not play the same parts as on the album. Exactly. I kept trying to find out where this part can go to really be a valid musical experience every night. So I'm really continuing that journey, aided a great deal by the shakeup in the membership of the band, because it's Steve Vai and Danny Carey. They're really kicking my butt, if I can say it that way, musically, and helping me advance to a different place than I was in the 80s. And yet we're doing the same pieces and hopefully keeping what's iconic about them.
Yeah, this is quite the super group here with Steve and Danny. And you would need that kind of a caliber musician to pull this stuff off. And those guys probably on a very short list of people that could get it done.
We felt that way. It was Adrian who put the lineup together, and he did a great job. And it's turning out not only to be musically everything we hoped for, but we're having a lot of fun. We get along really well, and I think that's the most common comment that I read on the web about the shows is great music, but these guys are also clearly having a lot of fun.
Well, again, Beat coming to the State Theater in Minneapolis, November 4th, and with the tour coming to an end here soon, where do you guys go from here? Will you be on the road again someday, or maybe record new music or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I have learned not to say too much about the far future in this rock and roll industry, because things turn out different, things change, and it doesn't happen. And people will say, "Well, wait a minute, he said this is going to happen." So we're looking at some touring next year. we are considering recording a show or a few shows of this tour. And what we'll do with that recording, we're not sure. It really is only just being discussed. So I can't really say anything definite, and it's not that I'm being sneaky, it's that there is nothing definite at this time anyway.
Well, Tony, one thing that is definite, you've had a new album out here recently, bringing it down to the bass. Can you tell the listeners a bit about that, about the new album?
Yes, I certainly can. I really had fun with it. I'm a guy who's on the road almost all the time with Peter Gabriel, with King Crimson, with my own band Stickmen, with Levin Brothers, a jazz band with my brother Pete. So I'm always writing music between those tours, but I haven't had time to complete the album and put it out for a lot of years. And this year I decided to put aside a couple months to really devote to that. It's called Bringing It Down to the Bass. Of course, if there's one thing I can do, it's, it's to play the bass. I've been doing it my whole life, but also because I kind of featured bass parts and bass techniques and bass sounds on each piece. But then instead of just completing it myself and having one rhythm section play the whole album, I kind of, as a gift to myself, decided I'd have a wish list of, well, what's the drummer who I most would like to hear play on this particular song. So I have 7 different drummers, and it's really kind of a all-star cast of great, really, I think, great musicians. And when I listen to the tracks now, and you do listen to your tracks a lot in the process of mixing and mastering your album, what excites me is not my own playing, but these other players who I brought in. Yeah,
it does seem like the album is a lot like your career has been. There's a bit of everything in there, and appearances by some big names. I mean, you definitely have done a little of everything in your career, and it's all kind of present here on the new album.
Yeah, thank you. My intention was not to do that. I know to describe an album, it's better if it fits clearly within one genre. And this is all sort of rock music. It isn't jazz, and it isn't classical, by the way. I started in classical music, but this time on this album, I decided to be free to let the music go where it goes. And if it ventures off into a different genre, for instance, I have a barbershop quartet with a poem that I wrote about the experience of turning over your record, your LP, for those who remember what those are, called Turn It Over Side B. And it just seemed to lend itself towards being a barbershop quartet. So I didn't try to force it to be a rock piece with a heavy backbeat. And I also did there's a lot of music on it, and a lot of different styles, but mostly involving the bass somewhat.
Well, when it comes to bass playing, it's really evolved, since I guess the early 50s when rock and roll kind of started getting going here, and you've had a lot to do with that. Are you still seeing kind of some innovations and people doing, new things with the bass that you hadn't thought of before?
Absolutely. I hear it all the time. I try to do that myself, and I try to be inspired when I hear a player that knocks my socks off, and there's a lot of that, especially on the web nowadays when you can see the person playing it on YouTube and see how they're technically doing it. Instead of being daunted by, oh my gosh, this 12-year-old is doing stuff I could never do in my whole life. Instead of being daunted, I try to be inspired by it or to be a student of what it is that player's doing, what is good and special about it, and to have it try and up my game for my bass playing. Even though I've been doing it a long time, I have a lot to learn, and there are techniques that I'm kind of practicing that I haven't mastered yet, that one day I'll bring out on one song or something, but only when it's appropriate. I've learned as a bass player, at least for me, what I'll play on a Paul Simon record is, of course, very different than what I'll play on a King Crimson record or a Pink Floyd record, or so what I do is listen to the music and try to fashion in my brain a bass part that's the best thing for that particular song. I don't bring in whatever technique I've been playing or whatever I'd like to play on my own album. That's a whole different thing. And so because that's my function as a bass player, yes, I have been able to play in a lot of different contexts, and hopefully I'd like to think that I play the appropriate parts for those contexts.
It is insane, the list of people you've worked with over the years and all the albums you've been a part of. I imagine at this point it might be hard for you to even keep track of all that.
You know what? The only time I think back about what I've done is when I'm doing an interview and I'm asked about it. I think that's a typical thing because we musicians, one of the lucky things about being a musician is you get really wrapped up in what you're doing, the music we're doing, literally tonight in my case, but also what's coming next, what tour I'm going to do next month, or song I'm writing that I want to finish in the next few months or in the next year. So you spend or at least I spend very little time looking back at what I've done. But yes, when I'm reminded of the albums I've done, many of which were popular and people heard them, I guess I have two feelings. One is I feel very lucky and honored to have been part of those great albums. And the other thing is I get, maybe it makes me a little tired if I hear the whole list of, 100, 200 people whose albums I played on. I get a little tired. I'm just joking about that.
Well, you did mention a few of them, of course, working with Pink Floyd and Paul Simon and David Bowie. And I wanted to ask you specifically your memories of working with Alice Cooper and, Welcome to My Nightmare, Goes to Hell. I mean, those albums definitely were huge for him and huge for a lot of people.
Sure, as heavy rock as they were, the studio, even though it was a long time ago, I vividly remember it was very calm studio atmosphere. It wasn't rock and roll at all. There was no drugs and wildness. I think Alice himself was practicing his putting. He had his golf clubs and he was practicing while he wasn't singing along. When okay, let's work on the guitar part. So Alice would break out the golf clubs and practice. So it was that sedate, it was that calm. But we were making, of course, some heavy rock stuff, and we felt good about it. And I'm honored to have been part of those albums. And let me just add the musicians I met on Bob Ezrin was the producer, wonderful producer, who later brought me in to play with Lou Reed and with Peter Gabriel's first album. So I really owe Bob a big thanks for sending me off in the career of playing with Peter Gabriel and Robert Fripp, whom I met on that first album with Peter Gabriel's. But some of the albums like those Alice Cooper albums had Steve Hunter, wonderful Steve the Deacon Hunter, wonderful guitar player with a singing voice. And on one piece on my new album called Me and My Axe, I thought, who do I know that I've played with that has a wonderful singing voice on his guitar? And I found him in Spain and was very happy to reunite with him and reunite it on the same piece with Larry Fast, the synth player on Peter Gabriel's first album. So in a way, we had a reunion of the Peter Gabriel band from album number one.
That's awesome. Yeah, you've obviously done a lot of work with Peter Gabriel. You mentioned Stickman and a lot of other bands. Is there anything in the works with them or maybe other artists that you're working with nowadays?
Yes and no. I'm immersed in the Beat tour, which won't finish until Christmas. So that's that for this year. And then next year we have plans. Again, tentative, but Stickman will almost definitely tour Europe in March. Levin Brothers, the jazz band that I'm part of, will tour in May. And April is on hold, and I will see Peter Gabriel in January. And believe me, like any fan, the first question I'll have for him is, what do you have in mind? What are we going to do? Well, can we do some more? Because because I love playing with Peter. It's my favorite thing in the world. But also the I.O. tour we did last year in both Europe and the U.S. was very special, very moving. Anybody who saw that, I think, was moved by Peter's talent and just the amazing songwriting he's doing nowadays. So I hope there's more, like a fan and also like a member of the band.
Excellent. Well, Tony, again, Beat coming to the State Theater in Minneapolis here November 4th. Is there anything else maybe the listeners should be watching out for?
I think you've covered so much that I want to thank you for the acuity of your questions, and thanks. You helped me, and I do hope to see some of the fans at this show. It's a really special show.
Well, Tony, it's been an honor speaking with you. I remember as a kid seeing your picture on a bass player magazine holding like a 12-string and thinking like, what the hell is this?
That's funny. Yeah, about the Chapman stick. Well, thank you. And again, I meant it when I said I appreciate how good your questions were. It really helps me.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's been an honor speaking with you, Tony. Thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thanks. Be well.
And again, that was bassist Tony Levin, and he is with the band Beat. They're coming to the State Theater in Minneapolis November 4th. Also, his new album, Bringing It Down to the Bass, is available now.